Hello and welcome back to Fundamental Conversations in Judaism. Today we continue our series about God. And we're going to start talking about what everyone loves to talk about, and that is the proofs of God's existence. Atheists and believers over the decades have argued and are still arguing. Online, in person, this is everyone's favorite conversation, source of argument, and it's been going on for thousands of years. This conversation of can we, as human beings, prove God's existence or not? In this short series, I'm going to try to collect you. I'll start with the first 5 most fundamental proofs of God's existence, those that survived the ages and are still used today and are still valid today. We are not going to use proofs of God that are no longer valid due to a new scientific or philosophical understanding. In the first part, we're going to deal with what can be called the proofs of God from creation. And the second part, we're going to deal with proofs of God that are not from creation itself, but rather from using our mind. We'll call it that way. Let's start with everyone's favorite proofs. The first proof from creation is probably the most oldest. It goes as following. It was brought up by the Greeks already, and is mentioned by the Rambam, and it's still valid today. There are either two options. Either the world always existed, or the world was created. If it always existed, okay, we have no proof of God's existence, but we also have no disproof. And therefore, the conversation, you need to look for other proofs. However, if the world reality was created and didn't always exist, that means something that already existed must have created it. And that works a chain backward. That thing must have always existed, because if it was also created, then something that pre-existed that also was created. Eventually, going back to the original source, something that wasn't created, rather always existed. Therefore, for thousands of years, when philosophers tried to prove or disprove God's existence, the assumption was, assuming the world always existed, can you prove God? Because if the world was created and didn't always exist, that's your proof. Didn't create itself, it was created. Done deal. Less than 100 years ago, that question seemed to be answered. And it's now commonly accepted amongst scientists that the world didn't always exist. There was something called the Big Bang that started all reality and the universe we see around us. And if the world didn't always exist and the world was created, we have the simplest proof. Didn't create itself, so it's created by God. The source of the Big Bang. That is proof number 1. Now, that proof is argued many times by atheists, and they pointed out many flaws, which are true. But these flaws only make this proof not 100% proof, rather only very reasonable. So what are these disproofs? The main common denominator of this is is actually very similar to what our Mishnah itself teaches us. The Mishnah says that you should not ask what happened before lefanim malachol. You shouldn't ask what happened, what existed before the world was created. Similarly, atheist scientists say, it's no fair. We cannot discuss the world that existed before the Big Bang and what caused the Big Bang, because we only know of the world that exists after the world was created. So the fact that we have no explanation to the world that existed before creation, due to the knowledge that we have for the world after creation, is not a problem. We just can't talk about it. And therefore, you're trying to bring proof from something we can't dispute you only because we just can't talk about it. There's nothing we know about it. Maybe the laws were different. Maybe before the world was created, things just came into existence. That's this proof number one. This proof number two is the idea that the world was created is based on the scientific fact that the universe is expanding. All creation is expanding. Universes are expanding. Galaxies are going farther and farther from themselves, which seems to show that they were once close together and now they're expanding far apart. And therefore there's a finite amount of time, 14.5 billion years, approximately. But what if at the end of the Big Bang, they expand and like a rubber band, contract, the big crunch. Stephen Hawking in his book, A Short View of the Universe, he says maybe that's an option. But he actually doesn't hold by the option. And because there is no scientific proof yet that this idea of the big crunch actually exists. But theoretically, can it exist? Maybe. So maybe that's going to happen. And therefore the world was not created, it's infinite loop. Other options that are more in the sci-fi realm talk about parallel universes that are always colliding, creating new realities. And therefore, while it's true that according to the scientific knowledge we have today, this proof is 100% valid, atheists claim maybe there might be scientific knowledge that we do not know that will help us disprove it. Now, the flaw in this proof is clear. Normally, one should live his life, and we talked about this in the first class about criteria to the truth. You should live your life according to the best of your knowledge. And the best of your knowledge is the knowledge you have in your possession today. One cannot live his life saying, well, maybe in the future, we'll discover new information that will contradict all the information I have now, all the knowledge I have now. And that's what atheists are doing to disprove this simple, otherwise simple proof. They're saying that maybe we do not have all the information, and maybe in the future new science will be discovered that will allow us to disprove this very simple ancient proof. Now, while what they say is true, should we live our life according to scientific knowledge that doesn't yet exist? That's for you to decide. That is proof number one. Big Bang, called the Big Bang proof. Proof from creation. Proof number two from creation is probably the most discussed. The most common, if you go on YouTube looking for religious preachers talking about proofs of God, they usually stick to this, and that's the wisdom and the beauty of the world. Look at the human eyeball, how complex it is. The human brain, how amazing it is. The cell, how fantastic, how amazing wisdom it has. And can such complex systems be created on their own without someone programming? Illogical. It's famous parable that you usually use is the whirlwind in garbage dump creating a Boeing 747. It's impossible. Or statistically it's impossible, more exactly. The chances that from random chance such complex systems can be created is improbable, therefore there must be a creator that designed it. Now that's the most common proof, and it's usually the most discussed because the arguments against it are seemingly strong. Because as we know, science has proven extensively the idea of evolution. And the idea of evolution explains how simple cells can evolve to more complex over time, given enough time, and as long as there is an advantage for something being more complex, advantage of being something gives advantage to live, random mutations eventually will allow simple cells to develop to something much more complex that from a later perspective, looks like, wow, there was design, there was thought here, but no, it was blind. The evolution is a blind process, no designer, and with no design, something complex and beautiful can be created. And then you go into the argument, evolution, yes or no. If you want to be religious, you can't believe in evolution. If you secular do believe in evolution, and do we accept science, not accept science? But this argument stems from misunderstanding of the proof. The proof is not from the fact that there's an eyeball, that human brain, that can be explained through evolution. The proof stems from the first living organism. The complexity of the first living organism that's based on DNA, which is random chemicals that create protein, that create a living cell. Evolution only starts after you have a living organism that starts to multiply, therefore giving advantage to those who are able to multiply and transfer their DNA to the next generation. But the first living organism that has the ability to transfer its DNA, how was that created? Evolution does not start before that. Evolution starts after one cell with DNA already exists. And the story of the world, the storm and the garbage dump creating a 747 is true just as much for that one cell. That one cell being created with life. Now that's claim number one. That's the first part of the claim. The second part of the claim is that the time span from that one cell, even if it were to come into existence randomly, how much time would it take for it to evolve to something complex as a human? Scientists found life on the planet to be a few hundred million years. We're not talking about billions of years, billions of years. It's limited. The chances of, in such a limited, relatively speaking, limited time span, that simple cell, that in itself, the chances of being created are infinitely low. Evolving to something so complex in itself is improbable. So you have improbable on top of improbable. And improbability number one is the first cell ever being created. Improbability number two is even after it was created in a limited, very limited time span, that cell be able to develop into something as complex as a human being. That is what's improbable. Therefore, proving that there was a designer. That is proof number. Now, the disproof is obviously very simple. We must have been very lucky, otherwise we couldn't have this conversation. Yes, it's very improbable, but can it be? Is there are any laws of physics or nature being broken by creating the first life cell? No. It can be created even without intervention from God. Right? If the right chemicals happen to meet, okay, so it could be. So obviously we were very lucky. And how do I know we're very lucky? Because if we weren't lucky and we wouldn't develop, we wouldn't be smart enough to ask these questions. So that's how we know we were lucky. More so, there are many other galaxies out there, many other planets. We happen to be the planet, most planets probably weren't as lucky as we are. We happen to be the lucky planet. And that's why we're here to ask these questions. So these are 2 out of 3 of the, we'll call them scientific proofs for God's existence. Proof number 1 was from the fact that the world exists in itself. It was created, didn't always exist. If it didn't always exist, it was created, there must be a creator. That fact being proven by the fact that science has now told us about the Big Bang, which proves that the world didn't always exist. And the second proof is from the complexity of life. We said the proof is not from the mere complexity of life, but rather from the creation of the first cell that contains DNA. That in itself is one tremendous complexity. And built upon that, even it did create the chances in a limited time span to evolve into something as complex as a human being. In the next class, we will discuss further one more proof from science and two proofs that have to do with more with logic and morality. Stay tuned.